Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, mole mole wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Chad Otis. He is here to celebrate his brand new picture book. It's called The Bright Side. Before we invite Chad into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls, the fantastically fun new picture book from our friend Janie Emas. Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls is Janie's second blended holiday book. It's illustrated once again by the amazing Brian Langdo. In this humorous and endearing story, blending both Easter and Passover, a young boy wants the Easter Bunny to bring his stepsister something special in the golden egg. He suggests various Passover themes. But even after squishing and squashing, the Easter Bunny can't make any of them fit. In the end, the boy does more than find something special. He saves his sister's favorite part of Passover. It's a joyful, engaging read, perfect for culturally blended families, and delightful for all readers. The playful rhymes will keep kids giggling, and Janie's family matzo ball soup included at the end is to die for. Check it out today. Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls. It's a really fun read, especially now during Passover and Easter time. Get yours today. Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls by Janie Emas. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by the fun and absolutely beautiful book by Linda Cutting, A is for Always, an adoption alphabet. A is for always, with your hand in mind. Adoption's a gift that will last for all of time. With gentle rhymes and lovely illustrations, A is for Always celebrates the joy and the love of adoption from A to Z. With B for birth parents, Q for questions, and U for understanding, it frames challenging aspects of adoption in a way children can understand. Best of all, each page shows a different adopted family of cuddly animals welcoming and cherishing a new child. We really, really love this book. The pictures, the illustrations are absolutely gorgeous. The story itself is just breathtaking. It's a beautiful book that you would love to have in your family library, whether or not you are an adopted family. A is for Always, an adoption alphabet by Linda Cutting. Join us right now from beautiful Idaho. Our guest is back on the podcast to celebrate his brand new picture book. It's called The Bright Side. Please welcome back to the show, Chad Otis. Hey, Chad, how are you?
Hi, Jed. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
I'm really excited to have you on. I should probably be more specific. You've been a part of our Drawing with Your Kids video show. This is your first time on the audio podcast, and we're really excited. If folks haven't seen the lesson that Chad created to help us learn how to draw cold turkey, you have to check that out on drawingwithyourkids.com. I'm excited to talk to you about this book that you wrote and illustrated, The Bright Side. Tell us all about it, please.
Yeah, sure. It's so The Bright Side is pretty near and dear and personal to me because it's based on my own childhood, where I grew up on a school bus for a little while. We lived born in Iowa, lived in the Midwest, and then my dad was an art teacher and lost his job at one point, and decided we should all live on a school bus that he bought for not much. And my mom painted it, and you'll see on the cover, especially the back cover, my mom painted it with designs, paisleys, and so on, like the bohemian hippies did at the time. And my dad turned it into our home inside over time. And we lived on that school bus and kind of zigzagged our way from the Midwest to California, of course, through everything in between, and we did art shows in malls. So in malls where they now have kiosks for selling, telephones, necklaces with your name on them and that sort of thing. They used to do art shows in there where artists would come in and set up their panels and set up their shows. My dad did paintings. He did portraits, oil portraits. My mom did pastels of dogs, and my brother and I ran around, helped setting up the show. Anyway, we lived on that school bus for about 4 years until my sister was born. So about when I was 4 till I was about when I was 8. And I didn't go to a conventional school with other kids until the 3rd grade. I was homeschooled, and I'll make air quotes because I'm not sure how much schooling happened there. I was homeschooled until we went to, a school with other kids. And so the book is about kind of that journey, and it's mostly, and it touches on housing insecurity and food insecurity, and social isolation and socialization, and how important those are for kids. But there have been other books about homelessness and food insecurity and housing insecurity. But I like to think this one's a little more accessible. I really wrote it with kids in mind. And I also really wrote it around this idea of bright side, that, when you don't have a lot of money and when you don't know where, what you're going to eat next or where you're going to be next, looking on the bright side and finding that optimism within is really important. And not only is it important, it shaped who I am. And I think it shapes who people are. Mm-hmm. And one of the things it does is, it gives people, and probably kids specifically, in their formative years, that sense of, self-agency and, problem solving and critical thinking, and really kind of having to find resourceful ways to, look at some of these problems and overcome them. And I think it, can end up giving people a strength that isn't necessarily part of a lot of other people's lives. So that's kind of the gist of it. And like I said, it's really from the perspective of the young character in the book. It's not preachy, and it's not, from an adult perspective. So I think it makes it really accessible that way, and makes it, it's fun. It's got some funny parts in it. I like to think it's got some funny parts in it. So yeah, that's kind of the overview of the whole thing.
Interesting. Were you aware at age 4 or 8 that you were houseless?
No, not really. My parents, and in the book you'll see this, we left and leaving behind my friends was tough. So I was really focused on, like most kids that age are, I was focused on, who am I going to play with? What am I going to play with? And, where are the kids in my life, more so than, thinking about how much money we had or where meals were going to come from, or, that I was different. And, especially starting at age 4, I don't even remember that much of it. Looking back, it's obvious, of course. But yeah, at the time, I eventually knew that we were, living a very different life, especially once we got into school. Mm-hmm. But at the time, it was just, there were parts of it that were fun and adventurous and exciting. And my parents did everything they could to make it feel as, kind of normal and fun, and like as an adventure as it could be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll be honest, as you were first describing it, until you used the word houseless, I was envisioning this really kind of romantic adventure. And I'm like, whoa, so cool. You're on the Partridge Family bus and you're traveling around and you're doing shows. And at 4 years old, you know, and I've been traveling around the country doing shows, but I wasn't living in a bus. I was staying at the Holiday Inn, and, you know, we had a home and everything. So it's funny when you first use the word, it was kind of like your word came up and slapped me in the back of the head and goes, no, look at this a different way.
Yeah, it's interesting because, you know, there's this this kind of movement now with schoolies, if you're familiar with that term, Jed, where people are, you know, buying buses and converting them into something to live in and traveling around. And it's like an RV, and they put it on Instagram, and a lot of, you know, Instagram-worthy pictures and that sort of thing. Well, in 1971, that's not what was happening. We were, you know, it was a different economy, it was a different time. Yeah, we weren't, it wasn't something where it was like, oh, let's do this, it'll be fun. And, you know, especially as a, you know, 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old, you know, for me, it was, you know, I'm leaving my friends. I don't know where we're going to be next. You know, we would, park in, you know, Kmart parking lots, if anyone knows what a Kmart is anymore. Until somebody would come shoo us away. And, you know, we were on, you know, we used food stamps. My parents called it funny money. You know, we would stay, we'd go to churches and stay in church parking lots and get food from those people. So yeah, it's a very different thing than kind of the schooly, or I've heard it called freeganism, and some other things. So it's probably, for young parents now, it's probably will be kind of a little eye-opening that way too, and that it wasn't just kind of a, you know, a fun thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And it certainly points out the difference of how life was back in the 70s as compared to now. Now you're mentioning this new trend. Well, it's one thing for a family to decide, oh, we're going to be digital nomads and be able to do a job from anywhere in the world that pays fairly, in some cases, fairly well.
Right.
And,
exactly.
you know, and I'm sure the buses that they're converting has more than what your family was able to put together.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is kind of hard to reconcile what's happening now with how things were then. You didn't have a remote job. We didn't have, of course, smartphones or even computers or anything like that. You needed to be, you know, somewhere to be working, to be making money. And, you know, we made some money. My parents made some money selling their portraits and so on. But as you can imagine, it wasn't much. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one of as much as this kind of touches on houselessness and food insecurity, one of the main things, especially as a kid, for me that really shaped my life was the social isolation. Mm. So not being around other kids for that long, and then eventually, you know, being plopped into a school and then going to, I think, something like 15 different schools by the time I was in high school. You know, that really shaped who I am. And that's, you know, when I started digging into writing this book, I started looking at, you know, what is happening now in this country with houselessness and food insecurity and so on. And it's ostensibly a bigger problem now than it ever has been. You know, we live in such a, you know, a wealthy country, but, you know, there are a lot of kids who don't know where they're going to be sleeping, at any given point, where the food's coming from. And that insecurity, those insecurities, studies show lead to, kids dropping out of school more, being, you know, involved in, you know, getting into trouble more. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I hope that the kids have fun with this. I hope the kids who recognize themselves in it will get that message that they can come through it and even be better for it. And I hope the kids who, recognize the kids in their school who don't have as much and wear the same clothes to school every day, maybe are quieter and that sort of thing, that they, kind of look out for them more, maybe embrace them more socially and have a better understanding of them. And, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of the things I remember from when the pandemic started, and my beautiful wife was teaching at the time, and the cry went up when we first heard, we're gonna pause for 2 weeks, and so school's gonna close, business is gonna close, stay home, and the outcry that I heard, and it was justified, was people like 80% of the kids get most of their food at school. At least here in the city of Boston. And what are we going to do about that? And this is terrible that we're going to close the schools. My immediate thought was, if we've known that 80% of the kids are getting most of their meals at school, that's a problem. And why haven't we been addressing that problem, long before? I don't think it's depending on getting your food at school should be a last resort and a kind of a stopgap thing. It shouldn't be something that we sit back and go, okay, well, the kids are getting fed at school. We don't have to worry about this anymore.
Yeah, no, great point. And, I hope that this book kind of brings some of that stuff to light. Penguin Random House and Rocky Pond Books are going to be donating a lot of these books to community centers and shelters, and even personal libraries for people in their homes. Because one of the things I thought of, was the kids who don't have as many resources. These books typically cost almost $20. Mm-hmm. Might not be able to buy it, and might even not, if they're a little bit nomadic, might not have access to a library or time to go to a library. So I'm glad to say Penguin Random House will be donating a bunch of these books. But to your point, yeah, it really does. The pandemic really did point out and expose that fact that a lot of kids do get their schools or their lunches and a lot of their food from school. And I did the same thing. I went into school early once the teachers discovered that I was food insecure, and they let me get breakfast in the cafeteria with the lunch ladies, and they gave me an extra, food ticket, so that I could, eat a little bit more before I went home to the bus, so I hope it does bring some of those things to light more, like the pandemic does. Maybe have some of those conversations, and, I'll continue. Hopefully, once this kind of spreads that message a little bit, I'll continue to do what I can to, move with that and learn and do what I can about it too.
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things I was thinking about as we were talking about how you grew up and how you hope that this would give some hope to kids that are in similar situations, is that those aren't very likely the parents who are going to be listening to this podcast, because they're most likely out there struggling to find the next church parking lot to stay at for a few days, and going from one job to another, and just trying to survive. And so I want to challenge the parents who are listening to this, not only to sit down and have a conversation with your kids about it, but maybe start a conversation at your school's PTA or PTO, and see if there are kids struggling in your community, in your school family, and see what you can do to help them. At the very least, feel more connected and more part of the school community.
Yeah, that'd be great. I love that. And I know that I've already seen some, the book comes out February 21, but I've already seen some feedback and some lists on social media that are showing this as a a teacher's pick, and I know that a lot of teachers, might be, introducing this at the beginning of a school year, so hopefully, all of the kids in schools or classes that have the book read to them or given to them will get that message that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? You mentioned that kids who grew up food insecure and experiencing some type of houselessness, or at the bouncing from place to place to place, that so many of those kids end up getting into trouble and not making great choices in life. How is it that you were able to get through this? Not only looking with a positive attitude at life, but being able to become successful.
I really credit that to just kind of an internal motor. When you talk about the kind of nature versus nurture conversation, I think a lot of kids and people, will struggle with this and have a really hard time overcoming houselessness, food insecurity, and get into trouble and that sort of thing. So I'm a firm believer in, strong kind of nature component of the nature-nurture conversation. So, and I have a brother who's a year and a half older than I am. He's not in the book for kind of editorial decision reasons, just to make the story simpler. But he has had a lot of challenges through life, and he's doing great now. But it didn't work out as well for him. It wasn't in his nature to kind of have that internal engine, the kind of the tendency toward the bright side of thinking, if you will. But again, my hope is that, someone like my brother who's, 5, 6 years old, 7 years old now might see this book and say, you know what, I recognize myself in that, and I recognize that I can get through this and maybe even be better for it. So if that, I like to think that, maybe some kids out there will see that at this early point in their lives, in this formative time in their lives, and it'll make a difference for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that a lot of us, and I put myself in that category, are blessed to be, be able to look at life as, a glass half full,
right? To
the point where I annoy so many people in my life with that.
Yeah, we're just, it's a kind of a luck of the draw sort of thing. I think.
Yeah. But I also think that it is something that you can help a kid develop too.
Absolutely.
That learning how to live gratefully is something. It's not just something that you're blessed with. It's something that you can adopt and embrace yourself.
Yeah. That's the nurture part of the nature nurture, right?
Yeah.
And I should say my parents, my parents, seeing my dad take a school bus and turn it into a home, take nothing and turn it into making some money out of doing paintings, and for everything that he was, there were parts of him that I recognized in me, and I think one of those things was he had a bright side to him. He had a way of looking at life where he wanted to make something out of nothing. Mm-hmm. So I should give them some credit there too, and just the artistic side of them wanting to create and share with people, and the courage that it took to live like that with a family and kids, and get through those tough times. Kind of speaks to their bright side ability.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
I imagine that telling this story must have been difficult in some ways. Now that it's out there and the world's going to be sharing in it, how has that changed you, if it at all?
Yeah, it was one of the most difficult parts about it, I think. I'm an illustrator and an author and illustrator, and I was putting myself out there for illustration work, and got the usual rounds of we don't need anything right now or whatever. But by the third time, an editor said, on his bio on his website, he's got that story about living on a school bus. If he ever does anything with that, I want to know about that. And finally, I kind of connected the dots and was like, well, I should probably tell that story. Today's world is so much more accepting to and even ready for something like a story about houselessness that it felt like the right time. And then, there were hard parts about telling the story. But honestly, altogether, it's, I've been telling the story for years because for me, it's always been kind of a story of optimism. Mm-hmm. So I've been telling people this story for years, and, the reaction is always so kind of big that, it's become kind of almost fun to tell this story. So, it's fun to tell the story of, kind of going through this hardship and having, trying to stay warm on the bus when there wasn't, when there wasn't heat. There's, no running water. So we showered at, local parks where you used to put a dime into the shower and turn the dial and get hot water for about 30 seconds and all those sorts of things. So, in the rearview mirror, which it very much is for me now, it's, it felt like the right time, in our world, in our country to tell this story. And it felt, like the right time for me to tell it. So there were hard parts to it, but focusing on, the child's perspective and making it kind of fun and interesting for kids, made it a lot, and parents will recognize the houselessness and food insecurity and, lack of running water and heat and that sort of thing. And kids will too, but not as much, I think.
Right.
All of those things together made it not as difficult. And, some people have asked me too, if my parents have seen it. My dad he's passed away about 30 years ago. But I showed it to my mom when she visited, and she liked it. She was glad to see the story told and didn't have any problems with it. That's for sure. So.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
In addition just to talking about houselessness, I do really hope that this book and books like it can help inspire adults and all of us to start having a conversation about housing. Because, there are lots of people who are houseless, but there are also lots of people out there that are spending 60% of their income to live, and in some cities live in what I would consider a closet. It's a really big issue, and it's getting worse, and we need to address it.
Yeah. And before we moved to Idaho about a year and a half ago, I lived in Seattle for 35 years, and Seattle, I know you're on the other side of the country, but Seattle has a major housing problem or a homelessness problem. So I saw that every day. I worked downtown for 25 years, and I saw it, every day, and it just is getting worse and worse. And I know that's happening in other major cities and probably small cities. And, there are a lot of factors involved, and without getting into, the politics of it, it's at the end of the day, it's not the fault of the kids at all, of course. So, that's where we can set politics aside and say, these are kids. They're not, they're not determining their own future. And they need nothing but, support. Yeah. And as much help as we can give them, as much thought as we can put into the problem.
Yeah. And I hope, just go a step further, that in addition to saying, oh, these are kids, I hope we say, well, these are our kids.
Right.
And we need to care for them.
Yeah. For sure.
Chad, this has been a really wonderful conversation. I'd love for folks to be able to know where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about The Bright Side.
Sure, yeah. So you can go to chadotis.com, and all my books are there, and a little bit about the story is there. And you can go to Chad's Books on Instagram, and I'll be posting things on Instagram and my Facebook page, and they're all linked from my site, chadotis.com.
Awesome.
And then, the book is sold wherever books are sold. Your local indie shop, of course, is the first choice. Mm-hmm. And then, the Barnes and Nobles and Amazons and so on, if you can't get to the local bookshop.
Yeah. And I think this would be a great book when you go to your local indie bookstore, and you ask them politely if they have The Bright Side by Chad Otis. And they say, no, not yet. And you ask them to order. Ask them to order two. Mm-hmm. One for you and one for a family that might be experiencing houselessness.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Love that, Jed.
Yeah. We've had a great... Oh, before I go, hey, can we get you to come back on Drawing with Your Kids and show us how to draw a character from the book?
Absolutely. I will. I'll do that.
All right. We've had a great time speaking to the author and illustrator of The Bright Side, Chad Otis. Chad, thanks so much for being with us.
You bet. Thanks, Jed.
We want to thank you so very much for being with us for this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. In the meantime, I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Chad Otis. Please be sure to check out The Bright Side. Also want to thank our sponsors, Linda Cutting. Please be sure to check out her beautiful book, A is for Always, an Adoption Story. I also want to thank our friend, Janie Emus. Please be sure to check out Easter Eggs and Matzo Balls, the latest blended picture book from our friend, Janie Emus. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Will Cheever, Cassandra Mason-Nay, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.